Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. Do you remember when I talked about the Herbert Blomstedt recent release of Schubert's Eighth and Ninth? I said in the subsequent Death of Historically Informed Performance video that because the ethos and the operating sort of details of period performance have been adopted by regular ensembles, and the best regular ensembles who do it better than any period pickup group ever could, because that has become the new paradigm. All that these period instrument groups have to do now is be more and more bizarre in order to sound different under the pseudo-scholarly rubric of authenticity or period this or that. But there's no truth to any of it. They're just going to be Dadaist monstrosities. And while we're talking about Dadaist monstrosities, I offer exhibit number 1. This just released recording of Schubert, Eighth and Ninth Symphonies, just like Blomstedt did with the Gewandhaus, but now with Rene Jacobs and the B'Rock Orchestra, the period instrument grouplet. And I mean grouplet. There's like a little tiny little grouplet of them. So, what is it? This is a total anti-musical, ridiculous abortion of a disc. It is so bad, it would be comical if it weren't expensive. It's on what label? Pentatone. And it's so terrible, so unmusical, so mindless, so bad, so amateurish. I mean, it's a joke. It's just a joke. The joke begins, more or less, it ends with Rene Jacobs. Now, who the hell was Rene Jacobs? Of course, he was a countertenor, and not a very good one. He was a mediocre countertenor who fell in with the right people at the beginning of the period instrument thingy, because he's like 75 now. And so he became a conductor of mostly vocal music. If you look at his discography, like 90% of it is going to be accompanied vocal music. And because he was a singer himself, he's good at that. I mean, he's good to his singers. So he made some fantastic Baroque opera recordings, marvelous Mozart opera recordings. It's not all completely witless drivel, but his orchestral recordings, when he started doing stuff without voices, when everything depended on him and his idea, you realized that the elevator was not going to the top floor. I mean, that was really, really clear, because there was no way to figure out what he was ever going to do. There's nothing authentic about this. There's nothing, somehow historically informed about being some sort of mindless gorilla whooping up and down in front of the ensemble and just making strange noises and odd things happen. And this is a case in point of the historically informed desperation school of performance. It's going to be grotesque. It's going to be bizarre. It's going to disregard everything it can about the music and the normal way it's supposed to sound. Now, forget the fact that the orchestra's all wrong. We'll get to that in a minute. Let's stick with Mr. Jacobs here. First, you have this is an 87-minute CD, by the way, for reasons we'll get into in a moment. First, we have the great C major symphony. The entire first movement goes by in the same tempo. Like the introduction is not an introduction. It's in the same tempo as the allegro. Actually, it's quicker. Do, 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 you, do, do. But then when it gets going, it plods. The whole performance plods, but really plods. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. The rhythm is so slackly held. And I mean, the end of the first movement, when the tune comes back oh my goodness, it's all wrong. The scherzo has all of its repeats, of course, and it's lethal. I mean, they try and dig into it at the beginning, chugga 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 chugga, and then it's just one note after another. After a minute, you just want to kill yourself. It's horrendous, and the finale. I will say this: he does play the last chord without the diminuendo, sort of. He doesn't exactly maintain a fortissimo. They don't maintain anything in this performance. The orchestra, which we also have to talk about, is so transparently inappropriate for this music. First of all, the balances are horrible. One of the main arguments you have for period instruments is that you hear the winds, you hear this. You don't. You don't hear anything. At the end of the first movement, when the tune comes back, supposedly in the winds, you don't hear it at all. You hear all this sort of like the accompaniments and the rhythm things. But at the same time, you don't even hear that because the trumpets might as well not be there in this performance. I mean, I've never heard such timid trumpet playing. Most of the time, they're invisible in fortissimos. I can't even begin to describe it. The sound is so wrong, and the wind section, squealy. It's like an orgy of gerbils. I mean, they sound like rodents. Squealing, annoying packs of rodents screeching by. I mean, in a group, their intonation is casual, and the actual sound is so unappealing. I mean, panicked rodents, that's what they are. That's what they sound like. And that's the Ninth Symphony. It is intolerable. You're not going to be able to get through it. I guarantee it. You listen to a couple minutes just to hear how grotesque it is because I'm saying these crazy things. And you're going to think, oh, I got to hear that. It's so bad. It's like watching a train wreck, or, you go down to a hockey game to watch the fights. It's, I get it. I get it. You're going to want to hear how horrible it is and experience it for yourself. So go ahead, do it. But I am reasonably sure, almost 100% sure, you are not going to get through the whole performance because you will just be completely disgusted after the first couple minutes. So that's the Ninth Symphony, okay? I mean, I can't even begin to describe just how amateurish and stupid the whole thing sounds. But then we get to the unfinished. Oh no. I almost don't want to come out of my little hedgehog-like ball here, but I must, and I will. The unfinished. First of all, this unfinished has a narrator. I'm not kidding. Remember when I told you they were going to do something different at all costs, just to be different, just for the sake of it? This has obviously nothing to do with authenticity at all. The narrator reads a thing that Schubert wrote in 1822 about a dream that he had, about his family and his parents and death. So each movement of the unfinished is preceded by this dream. But then you get the actual performance, which again is almost entirely unlistenable. First of all, we must talk about the orchestra. The balances are so bad. I mean, they're just wrong because you have this teeny tiny string section. It's like, 4 or 5 violins and firsts and 4 or 5 seconds and 2/3 of a viola and 4 cellos and 4 basses, which, I mean, it's okay in the bass department if you could hear them. But even with that tiny string section, like I said, you don't hear the trumpets, the winds routinely get drowned out, and you don't hear the strings. So, for example, the opening tune of the unfinished, well, you can't even hear that. What you hear is the pizzicato cellos and basses. You hear blonk, 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 blonk. I mean, what the hell is that? There's a tune. If you don't know the difference between the accompaniment and the melody, then you are not qualified to conduct this music. And quite often that's the case. The balances are reversed. And the result is just horrible, unbelievably horrible. It's not even that the strings, don't use vibrato. I mean, they don't use vibrato. It wouldn't matter if they did. I mean, it sounds so tiny, so small, so ineffectual. It's unbelievable. And then there's this other, dream monologue part 2, and the second movement, the Andante con moto. Jacobs noticed the moto is, wait a minute here, 8 minutes and 23 seconds long. Usually it's about 12. It's usually the same length as the first movement. Here the first movement is 13 minutes and 28 seconds long. So it's blank, 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 da da, ya da da, do 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 do, bam 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 bam. It's just the antithesis of music. It really is. It's a horror show. Words fail me, and they rarely fail me. But there isn't enough that I can say about how bad this is to drive home the point that it's a disgrace. It's simply a disgrace. It has no purpose to exist other than to be, to thumb its nose at Schubert and at me and you, and see what kind of fools we are. Jacobs may be taking this very seriously, but then again, let me just tell you a little story to wrap this up. When I was in college, I decided to take music theory because I loved music but knew nothing about theory. And so I went, since I was at Johns Hopkins, I could take courses at the Peabody Conservatory. And so I went to take music theory. And in order to get into theory, you had to take a graded exam so they could place you in the correct section. And so I sat for this exam, and I knew nothing about music theory. Other than how to read music. I played the clarinet. I knew how to read music. But theory, like composition, like figured bass, okay. So I looked at this exam, and I could do some of it because you had to write scales. It was really from the very basics to 12-tone theory and all that stuff and graphic notation. It was a really long possible exam, and I managed to complete about an hour of it before I gave up. But I was sitting there, and the guy who proctored the exam was the guy who taught like the music appreciation classes at Johns Hopkins, all of which I took because I was an easy A, you know what I mean? So yeah, I knew who he was. And I'm sitting there doing this exam, and 5 minutes into it, half the people in the room get up and walk out. And I was shocked. I figured, if you're in the Peabody Conservatory, at the very least, you should be able to do half an hour of it, an hour, before you gave up. But nope, they just put their papers down and left. And I kept going. And after an hour, I turned my exam in, and I said to the guy, to the proctor, I said, who were those people? And he looked at me and said, oh, those are all the voice majors. And I said, oh, I guess that explains it, doesn't it? Well, it's enough to say that Mr. Jacobs here, his training was singing in a cathedral choir and doing voicey things. He is not a conductor. He's not even a very good musician. He's just not. He really isn't. He's a retired, not very attractive singer who has done good work by other singers. But for this, you can tell when someone is just hopelessly out of their depth. And he really is hopelessly out of his depth. And the result is just abysmal. Just abysmal. It's just frightening. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you for joining me. I know you're going to want to hear it just for fun. And it is fun. I'm not going to say go here just for fun. But please, do not come back and tell me that you think it's interesting because it's different. I don't accept that. There's difference that is musical and interesting and professional and sensible and intelligent. And then there's just stupid, ridiculous, unmusical nonsense. And this is that. So take care.